drawbacks to arrays and other collections, even array list and list, are that you're limited to working with one data type through all the elements. And oftentimes we have data that contains different types of data. In this case, you'll see a text file here that I have some names, some numbers, and a true or false. The information represents a student's last name, their first name, the score on exam 1, score on exam 2, score on exam 3, and whether or not they are a CIS major. Now, when we read this into C#, it's going to be read in all as string data, but I want to be able to put it in a format that represents these different data types, but an array just doesn't work for that. We can define structures within C# by using the keyword struct, and I give it a name. In this case, I called it student, and we usually capitalize the first letter of our structures. And then a set of curly braces or curly brackets. And then I can put in some different data types, such as string last name, string first name, float score 1, float score 2, float score 3, and then a Boolean value of CIS major. And I make all of these data types public. And that allows me to access these outside of the structure. Now I can use that data structure in an array. So I can create an array called gradebook of type student, the type that I just defined. And I create that as a new student. In this case, I'm going to have it just have one record, and we're going to resize that array as we read in data from this text file, because the data here, the number of records, may change. But then in my code, when I want to access the different elements of that array gradebook, I can reference gradebook in the element, and then using the dot notation, I can say dot last name or dot first name or dot score 1 and so forth, and dot CIS major. And I can assign values to those. I can also pull values from those. So this gives me a lot of flexibility then in working with different types of data within an array by first creating a struct. Structs are very powerful. However, in most cases, what we do in a struct, we're going to actually end up creating in a class. So it's sort of an intermediate step to classes. And actually in a struct, you can even write methods. We're going to limit our structs just to fields or variables. And then we'll get into writing classes in a couple of weeks. And then we'll get something that's much more extensible than just the struct. But if you just need some simple data, creating a struct is a great way to go, and then accessing that through an array or some other collection such as a list or an array list. I want to create a C# program that will read this data in to an array using this struct format. And so I'm going to retrieve it, and then what I want to see is all the majors and all the non-majors and their scores and their average score in a dialog box. So here we go. So that's what we're going to create. Just one button, reads the data, processes it, stores it into an array, and then uses that array to separate the CIS majors from the non-majors. Let's go over to Visual Studio. So I've already created my project. I'm going to just walk you through what I did. And I have one form with one single button named btn retrieve. That's going to retrieve the data from the text file. And that text file I just showed you I have placed in my debug folder of this project. So we can just open it from there. Let's look at the code for this. So I created the structure that we looked at earlier with public variables for last name and first name as string, score 1, score 2, and score 3 as float values, and CIS major as a Boolean value. And then I created an array called gradebook of type student, and I had it just start with one record. Here then is my retrieve button click handler. We're going to open up the file called gradebook.txt that's located in our current folder, which is our debug folder. And until we reach the end of the stream, we're going to read one line at a time, and we're going to call a method that I've created of add new record. Once we're done with that whole file, reading one line at a time and creating each new record, we're going to close. Then I'm going to call a method to sort the gradebook, and then one to show the major records. Okay, so let's look at this add new record. So we're going to have our read line, and we're going to pass that into add new record as XYZ. Then we're going to create a temp array of type string, and it's going to hold 6 different values, and those are my last name, first name, score 1, score 2, score 3, and CIS major. Those are all being read in as strings. Then I'm going to have I as an integer variable, which is the length of my gradebook array. That's going to start out as 1. I'm going to assign values to my temp array of type string by splitting the XYZ string passed on the commas. These are comma delimited text values. I'm going to resize my array by passing it as a reference to the gradebook and I plus 1. So each time I'm going to add another record. And then I'm simply going to take temp array and take each element, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I'm going to trim the strings and assign that to my gradebook element I. That's going to be 1 the first time through. And I'll assign to element last name temp array 0. And then element first name temp array 1. Element score 1 will be the temp array 2, and so forth. My CIS major, which is a Boolean value. And each of these, for the float and the Boolean, I'm parsing the string into that data type. Because score 1, score 2, and score 3 are all float data types, I can only assign a float value to them. CIS major is a Boolean data type, I must assign a Boolean value. So we're going to convert that string, either true or false, to a Boolean true or Boolean false. That's going to read in all my data into my gradebook array. I'm going to close my file, and then we're going to sort the gradebook. And I simply used a little bubble sort that we've already seen, and got 2 nested loops. I'm going to reassign those values based on the last name of each of my gradebook entries, and here I've got J and I being compared. And if those are less, I'm going to swap, and we'll create a temp student of gradebook I equals gradebook J, and gradebook J equals temp student. That sorts, the last thing I'm going to do is show our records. And so here I'm going to create a string called majors, and a string called non-majors, and a prompt. And those are all string values, and they're all null to start with. I'm going to go through my gradebook from I to gradebook.length. And actually, I'm going to set 0 is always going to be an empty record. So I'm going to change this to 1 because I noticed I was getting an empty scores. So I'm going to change that to a 1 because my element 0 is always empty because I started with 1, the length, and that's the element that I first assigned to is element 1, so I never use element 0. And then I'm going to get the gradebook I, score 1, score 2, and score 3, and assign those to 3 float variables. And I just did that to save some typing down here. My strings are getting a little bit long. But I do want to find the average. So I'm going to take those 3, add them together, divide by 3. That's going to give me a double type variable that I call AVG. Then I'm going to look at the CIS major. So if gradebook element I CIS major, and remember that's either true or false, if that's true, then they are a major, and we're going to add them to the majors string up here of first name space last name, a couple ellipses, the word scores, then I'm going to see the score A, score B, and score C, comma separated, and then I want to see what the averages are, display the average of those 3 scores. If they're not a CS major, I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to assign them to my non-majors string. In case there be any blank lines in either my majors or non-majors list, I'm going to get rid of those blank lines by seeing if that first character is less than an A. And as long as that's true, I'll get rid of that first character. So if there's several blank lines, several new line characters, I'm going to get rid of those. Do the same things for non-majors. And then for our message box, I'm going to build a prompt of CIS majors, a new line character, my list of majors, concatenate to that phrase non-majors, and concatenate to that as a new line, all the lines of the non-majors string. My message box is going to show the prompt, and then my title is roster report. Let me run this. I'm going to retrieve the data, and there's my report. I get all the CIS majors, and I get the non-majors. And now that blank line that I had up there earlier had just the empty scores, that has been removed. If you just jumped into this video, you can see all the videos from the C# Xamarin Programming Cohort playlist by clicking on the image in the lower right. And if you'd like to be alerted to future videos that I create, you can click my picture up in the top right and subscribe to the channel.